A young bobcat drags his dying brother through a deadly blizzard to a stranger's door, desperate for help. What happens next will change both their lives forever. Before you watch, remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss another touching story like this one, and write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. The man's name was Samuel Brooks, 71 years old, who had been living by himself for over 10 years in an old wooden cabin hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. He used to teach literature at a small school close to Asheville, but after his wife passed, he moved up into the mountains. His cabin was about 1.5 miles up a dirt road that got covered by snow for half the year, surrounded by tall trees, hills, and streams that turned solid with ice. Samuel had gotten used to the quiet, to chopping wood and keeping the fire going, to nights sitting in his chair reading a book, thinking that was all he had left in life. He never thought that quiet would be broken by something he believed he would only read about in nature books. The noise that woke him up wasn't the usual sound of the house creaking or a tree falling down in the storm. It was sharper, weaker, almost like crying. At first, he thought it might be a fox or a lost dog hurt in the blizzard. He pushed his blanket away, got up slowly with his stiff joints hurting, and walked to the door. When he opened it, the wind hit him like a knife, snow spinning so thick it stung his eyes. But through all that white mess, he saw them, 2 small shapes sitting on his porch. One baby bobcat, no bigger than a house cat, but you could tell what it was from its pointed ears and wild fur, was struggling under the weight of another baby bobcat. It pulled itself forward, paws slipping on the frozen wood, never letting go of its hurt brother. The one being carried barely moved. One leg was bent the wrong way, eyes almost closed, breathing shallow. The standing cub wobbled once, made a sound that wasn't quite crying or growling, but something in between, and then fell sideways across its brother. Samuel stopped in the doorway, his heart beating fast. All the years he had ignored stories about bobcats coming near cabins, hunters talking about seeing eyes in the trees. But here they were, not shadows, but real herding animals on his porch. Everything inside him said to close the door, to keep the wild things outside, to let nature handle it. But seeing that cub fighting through the storm, refusing to leave its brother behind, hit him harder than fear. It broke down the walls he had built around his heart. He bent down, knees stiff, and picked up both of them. They were surprisingly light, their fur wet with melted snow, their bodies shaking like leaves in the wind. Inside, he put them on towels by the fire. He rubbed their legs gently, wrapped them in old wool blankets, and whispered to them without knowing if they could hear him. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe here." One made a small crying sound like a kitten having a dream. The hurt one didn't make any sound at all, just the smallest breath touching his wrist. Samuel pressed his fingers gently to the tiny chest, feeling for a heartbeat. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. Then a flutter, weak, but there. "No, no, not like this," he whispered, his voice breaking. Samuel got a shallow bowl of warm water and put it near them. The stronger cub moved, put its nose in clumsily, and licked drops while its golden eyes blinked half-closed. Hope grew inside Samuel, as fragile as the flame in the fireplace. When he looked at the injured cub, he saw the leg was swollen and twisted at the joint. He remembered his old days teaching anatomy through literature, the times he had helped students understand bones and muscles through poems. But deeper than that, he remembered other hands, Martha's hands, gentle and sure as she tended to wounded birds they'd find in their garden. "You always knew what to do," he whispered to the memory. Martha would know exactly how to help. Those memories helped him now. He made a splint from small pieces of wood and strips of cloth torn from a shirt, wrapping the leg with steady hands. His fingers moved with a care Martha had taught him, treating fragile things as if they were made of light. He talked through each step like he was teaching again, his voice quiet and calming, and the sound seemed to relax the cub in his hands. "This might hurt a little," he murmured, "but it's going to help you heal. I'll do my best for both of us." For hours he took care of them. He kept the fire burning until sweat soaked his shirt, rubbed warmth into their fur, moved them closer when their shaking got worse. The injured cub's breathing grew shallow as the night wore on. Samuel barely slept, checking every few minutes, pressing his ear to the small chest, counting heartbeats like prayers. "I failed her," he whispered into the darkness, thinking of Martha's last days when his care hadn't been enough. "But I won't fail you. Not you." He held them against his chest when they seemed to weaken, feeling their small breaths against his skin. Time didn't matter anymore. The storm attacked the cabin walls, but his world had become just those two cubs. At one point, the stronger cub woke up in his lap, its eyes opening with a question he could almost understand. Why this human had decided to help? With weak effort, it pressed its head briefly into his hand before falling back asleep. That small gesture touched him deeper than anything in years. "Maybe this is why I'm still here," he whispered, understanding something he'd never grasped before. Just after midnight, a sound scratched at the back door. Samuel became tense. His teacup shook in his hands. He put it down and crept to the frost-covered window to look through the storm. There she was, the mother bobcat. She was big for her kind, lean muscles moving under thick fur covered with snow. Her eyes glowed pale gold in the moonlight, breath coming out white. Fear filled Samuel's chest. Every instinct screamed to lock the door. But then the cubs moved inside, crying weakly, their voices reaching toward her smell. That sound cut through him sharper than fear. They were calling for her. The mother didn't snarl or hit the door. She just waited, still and watching like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Samuel's hands shook on the door handle. To open meant giving up control. To close meant making the cubs suffer. Finally, something deeper than thinking moved him. Slowly, he lifted the handle. Snow swirled in, the cold biting his skin. The bobcat ducked low, stepping inside with careful movements that didn't match her size. She didn't look at Samuel like he was just smoke by the fire. She walked straight to the cubs. With a deep rumbling sound that Samuel could feel in his bones, she gathered them close. The hurt one cried softly, pressing its face into her chest. The other reached up, holding on to her fur with desperate relief. She sang to them, a sound that was half lullaby, half rumble, older than words. Tears burned Samuel's eyes at the raw love in it, at the way her jaw trembled as she held what was most important to her. "They're going to be okay," Samuel whispered to himself, watching the reunion. The storm didn't stop. For 3 days, it raged, keeping them all together in that cabin. Samuel kept the fire going without stopping, feeding it until his back hurt, because without its heat, they would all die. He put strips of smoked deer meat near the door. At first, she only touched them after he moved away, her body tight with suspicion, but hunger softens even the hardest hearts. By the second night, she didn't wait anymore. When he put meat on the table, she reached out a paw and pulled it in, her eyes never leaving his. They stood just a breath apart, and though every muscle in Samuel's body was tense, she didn't attack. Something fragile passed between them, not spoken, not named, but real. He learned their sounds, the cubs' soft cries when they moved, the mother's low hum when she comforted them, the shuffle of paws on the wooden floor when she shifted her weight. At night, as logs fell into glowing coals, the cabin filled with the rhythm of breathing, a living music that carried Samuel beyond loneliness. "You know," he said quietly to the mother one evening, "I never thought I'd have visitors like you." When morning finally came clear and blue, the bobcats were gone. Only wet towels, bits of fur, and faint paw prints were left. Samuel knelt down, pressing his hand into one print, whispering thanks to the empty air. Spring came, snow melted, streams ran wild, and Samuel hiked again with his old camera. But once high on the ridge, he slipped on loose rocks and fell hard. His ankle cracked, swelling right away. He crawled to the shelter of a big rock, shivering as darkness fell. No phone, no help. Hours passed. Cold crept into his bones. Then came a rustling sound. He prepared for coyotes, but out of the trees walked the mother bobcat. Behind her came the two cubs, now taller, stronger, the injured one showing a faint scar above its paw. They circled him slowly, the mother pressing prints into the snow in careful patterns, marking a protective ring around him like drawing a signal. Samuel realized dimly what she was doing. His heart pounded as recognition hit him. "You came back for me," he breathed, amazement mixing with gratitude, just like he came back for his brother. Hours later, headlights cut through the dark. Rescue workers found him inside that strange ring of paw prints. They carried him out, talking about luck, never guessing the truth. Back at his cabin, ankle wrapped, Samuel thought of them every day. He filled a notebook with drawings of the mother's face, wide, timeless, crowned with quiet strength. No pencil could capture the depth of her eyes, the mix of wildness and patience he had seen there. Still he drew as if by drawing he could keep the memory alive. Small signs appeared near his clearing, half-eaten rabbits placed neatly by the woodpile, bits of fur caught on logs, fresh prints by the stream. Each sign stopped him still, a quiet recognition. The bond had not broken. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills in liquid gold, Samuel stepped onto his porch and froze. The world had gone quiet in that special way it sometimes did in the mountains, when the last light seemed to demand stillness from every living thing. Across the clearing they stood, the mother, huge and proud, her fur glowing with firelight as the dying sun caught her coat. At her side were her two cubs, no longer the fragile, shaking creatures he had once sheltered, but grown into powerful shadows of strength and independence. The sight of them hit him like a wave. One carried the scar of that storm, a faint ridge across the shoulder where life had tried to break it but failed. The other stood tall, amber eyes steady, gaze fixed on Samuel as though it had carried him in memory through every season apart. For a long moment time stood still. The breeze stopped. The trees seemed to bow in silence. Samuel felt his heart stumble in his chest. He had waited for this, dreamed of it, half feared it might never come. They looked at him as he looked at them, and recognition passed between them, older than words, deeper than gratitude. It was not the recognition of man to beast, or rescuer to rescued. It was kinship, raw and lasting, an understanding forged in the fire of survival and trust. Samuel reached for the railing for balance. His knees had weakened, but not from age. It was the weight of the moment, the sudden rush of everything he had carried flowing back to him all at once. His voice was soft, barely more than breath. Yet it carried into the stillness as though the forest leaned closer to hear. "Thank you," he whispered. The words shook out of him, not only for their presence tonight, but for every day they had given him a reason to get up, to keep going, to keep believing he still mattered. "Thank you for trusting me, for saving me, for reminding me I belong to something bigger than myself." The amber gaze did not waver. If anything, it deepened, as though answering without sound that the bond they had shared had not weakened, but lasted, invisible, yet unbreakable. The mother flicked her tail in a motion that felt like goodbye, not rejection, but respect, acknowledging that he had been part of their story, a chapter marked with warmth and shelter. Then, with her cubs at her side, she turned, and together they disappeared into the trees. The shadows swallowed them branch by branch until only memory remained in the clearing, as fragile and bright as the last threads of sunset. Samuel stayed long after, his hand resting on the railing, the air still charged with their nearness. He thought back to the night of the storm when two shaking cubs had appeared on his porch, one dragging the other through a blizzard that should have ended them both. In saving each other, they had saved him, too. The wilderness had written their story in its silence, binding man and bobcat together in a secret only the mountains would ever hold. Did you enjoy this story? Would you have opened the door and let the mother bobcat inside, or would you have kept it closed to protect yourself? Yes or no? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.